Job. Job was a godly man. He was a wealthy man. He was a well-respected man. Seems that he was probably the most prominent man of the East in those days. He was a man that used his wealth well. He helped the poor, he helped the sick, he helped the underprivileged. And when his children would come together to celebrate, Job would offer sacrifices. He would figure, maybe one of my children cursed God in their hearts. Maybe they sinned in their hearts. And just to make sure, Job would then take sacrifices, and he would offer up sacrifices on behalf of his family. Back in those days, during the days of the patriarch, that was common, that the father of the home would take the role of the priest, and he would offer up sacrifices on behalf of his family. And Job did that. He was a godly man. And in fact, he was so godly, he was so righteous, that even God bragged to Satan about Job. Have you seen my servant Job? God said to Satan. And have you seen how he serves me and how he's righteous and all that? And Satan says, well, why not? Because you have protected him. You've placed a hedge of protection around him. I can't get to him. So who wouldn't serve you if you are protecting him? Well, we know that God said, okay, so you can afflict him. We'll see. We'll test Job. We'll see if he's going to stand firm or not. So God removes some of the hedge of protection around Job. He removes that. That gives us to see that God has a hedge of protection around you. As his believer, God protects you. Satan cannot get to you without permission from God. Well, Satan wastes no time. He's a destroyer. He's someone who comes to kill and to destroy. So this is Satan's territory, to come and afflict Job. And in one day, he kills all his animals. He kills his entire farm, kills everything, including his children. And Job reacts in mourning, in ashes, which was common in those days. He, sprinkles ashes on his head and puts on sackcloth, and he's mourning. But in all of that, Job does not sin. His response is, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Notice this. He doesn't say, the Lord has given and Satan has taken away. He says the Lord gave and the Lord took away. Why? Because he realized that the enemy could not have afflicted him without God allowing it. So ultimately, it was the Lord. He didn't give credit to Satan, but rather to God. And so in all of that, in his response, he did not sin. So once again, didn't work what Satan thought was happening. He didn't curse God. So once again, God and Satan have a talk, and God reminds Satan again of the fact that Job is still righteous. Satan says, well, if everything is taken from him, that's not that hard. People's going to handle that, but just touch him personally. Skin for skin. And then we'll see. We'll see. Like Abraham, when his life was at stake, he lied about his wife. Tell the king that you're my sister, because he feared his personal life. So if it affected him personally, even Abraham, the patriarch, was willing to lie. Or how about David, who was willing to act like a crazy man before the king of the Philistines? He was drooling and over his beard because he was afraid of his personal life. So God touched Job personally, and then we'll see if he won't curse you to your face. Well, God removes the head of protection a little bit further. Job becomes sick. Sores break out all over his body. But even in all of this, Job still does not sin. So Job is now there. He's reached the bottom of his life. He's probably sitting on the trash heap of the city in an ash pile. And his three friends hear about it, and they come to visit him: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And they sit with him for 7 days. They're astonished at the magnitude of Job's suffering and his loss. They weep with him, they sit with him for 7 days, and then Job begins to speak. And he expresses himself, and his friends also begin to speak. And there are 3 cycles of dialogue. Eliphaz speaks, Job speaks, and then Bildad speaks, then Job speaks again, and Zophar speaks, and then Job speaks once again. And they go around in 3 circles like that. And then Eliphaz has spoken up to this point, where we pick it up this evening. And basically what he says, to summarize it, he says, whoever has suffered being innocent. Job, the reason you're suffering is because you have sinned. That's it. And maybe by this time, as the dialogue is going on, more people are gathering around. Back in those days, that was common. Nowadays, you play soccer, you play volleyball, you play basketball. There's all kinds of sports. Back in those days, it was very common is that the philosophers would come together and they would discuss certain things. They would start discussing back and forth, and then people would start to gather around and they would listen in. And the entire book of Job is very poetic. Not poetic in the sense that we know poetry, but in a sense that it is thought for thought. It builds one thought on top of the other. And so it's a very beautiful book when it comes to the original Hebrew language. And so Job is being confronted by his friends. Eliphaz so far has said that you have sinned, Job, that is why you're suffering. Well, Job responds in chapter 6, and he appeals to his friends to be a little bit more understanding. And he describes, he expresses himself how he feels. In verse 1 of chapter 6, it says, Then Job answered and said, Oh, that my grief were fully weighed, and my calamity laid with it on the scales. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. The terror of God are arrayed against me. See, if my grief were weighed. See, it is one thing to be suffering, and it is another for his friends to be sitting on the ash heap with him, but they're not suffering. They're sitting there and giving advice. And Job feels that his friends don't understand. They don't empathize with him. They can't really identify with him. They don't know what he's going through. See, it's impossible to really understand what someone goes through unless you've been through the same thing. You do not know what it is like to lose a spouse unless you've lost the spouse. You can probably try to imagine, but you really don't know what that is like. You don't know what it is like to lose a very close loved one unless you've actually experienced it. You can probably figure out how it feels, but you can't really know. You can't really truly identify unless you've been there. And that's kind of how Job feels. He feels that these guys are giving all this advice, but they don't really know what I'm going through. They can't really identify. It can be awkward to go and visit someone that is suffering, especially if it's someone that's suffering severely, maybe a terminal disease. What are you going to say? How are you going to respond? And I think Job's 3 friends are well-meaning, but they don't really help Job at all. Verse 5 continues, he says, Does the wild donkey bray when it has grass? Or does the ox low over its father? Can flavorless food be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them. They are as loathsome food to me. What he's saying here is really, and again, he's speaking in parables, if you would. He's talking about food being without taste. But in reality, what he's saying is, guys, friends, your comfort is flavorless. I don't find any nourishment in your words. You know what Job needed at this point was nourishment. He needed encouraging words. See, when someone is suffering, maybe that is not the best time to debate why he's suffering. Have a discussion. Why is this going on? Why is he suffering? For Job, simply some words of encouragement would have gone a long way. And so Job tries to continue to explain how he feels and how hopeless he really feels. In verse 8, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for, that it would please God to crush me, that he would lose his hand and cut me off. Then I would still have comfort. Though in anguish I would exult, I will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. What strength do I have that I should hope? And what is my end that I should prolong my life? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh bronze? Is my help not within me? And is success driven from me?" See, Job, in his feeling of hopelessness, leads to a feeling of uselessness. Hopelessness leads to a feeling of uselessness. And when you feel useless, well, Job didn't want to live. He despaired of life. And he wanted God to take his life. Obviously, Job knew that it was wrong to commit suicide. So he was just longing for God to crush him. See, Job would wake up the next day, and his dilemma is still there. His loss is still there. His family has still died. His daughters and sons are still dead. Everything that he owned is gone. His sores are still there. Not his friends. They wake up and they can walk away. They're fine, but not Job. And so he feels hopeless. Day after day, the suffering goes on, and he doesn't see it getting better. He doesn't really see light at the end of the tunnel, and he's longing for his death. And then Job, he explains how he feels, how they're doing with comforting him. In verse 14, "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend." See, now he's instructing them on how to encourage someone is suffering. "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty." Verse 15, "My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and into which the snow vanishes. When it is warm, they cease to flow, and when it is hot, they vanish from their place. The path of their way turn aside, and they go nowhere and perish." What he's saying is, guys, you are inconsistent. See, when I needed you the most, you weren't there for me. It's like a creek, he says. It's like a brook that dries up during the dry season. When the water is needed the most, the brook dries up. See, in the rainy season, there's plenty of water, and then the brook runs. But when it gets dry and you really need it, it's gone. There's no water there. Job says, that's how you guys are. When I need you the most, you're not there to comfort me. See, someone put it this way. He says, a true friend is someone that comes in when everyone else has gone out. So Job feels that his friends are sitting there with him on the ash heap. They're there physically, but emotionally, they're kind of like the Levite and the priest. When they saw that man that had been beaten by the robber, they just went the other side and they hurried by. They were uncomfortable with what they saw. They didn't know how to respond to this man that had been beaten. And so Job was disappointed. Someone that had a terminal disease, and I know him well, he said, when I had a lot of friends, and when I became sick, and he was terminally ill, he knew his death was imminent, he said he felt that his friends left him. He felt he had a lot of friends when he was healthy. But when he became sick, he says his friends just left. They didn't come out. They couldn't come around anymore. He said there were a few isolated people that still came to visit him. The rest all left him. I don't know why, but maybe as part of it is that people don't know how to respond in such a circumstance. When you see someone dying on a deathbed, how do you respond to that person? How do you comfort them? What do you say? And so maybe people feel awkward. They're not sure how to respond to that, and so they just stay away. Somebody else is going to take care of him. Somebody else is going to visit him, and they don't show up. Well, in Job's case, these friends, we can give them credit. They did show up, even though they didn't do a very good job at comforting him. Chapter 7, Job expresses here how futile life is, how fleeting life is. Verse 1 of chapter 7, is there not a time of hard service for a man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man? Like the servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages? So I have been allotted months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? And the night be ended, for I have had my fill of tossing till dawn. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. Kind of sounds like Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Life is all vanity. And Job expresses here kind of that. It's like you're waiting for something. Like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, and he's working hard. Oh, if I only could be in the shade. Or a hired man who's working. Oh, if payday roll around. He's looking for something that's just out of reach. And that's kind of how Job feels. He's miserable where he is, and he's just waiting for the other side. Verse 6, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and are spent without hope. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. So life is short. It's like a handbreadth. And once we die, Job says, we're not coming back. It's not reincarnation. You're not, going to go to the other side and you get another chance. It's it. That's it. One chance of a life, and then it's over. Job, as he continues expressing how he feels in his suffering, he says, I feel like as if God is watching me the whole time. During the day, at night, in the morning, God's eyes are on me. It's like he's watching me, and I'm uncomfortable with that. And God was watching. God was watching Job. What he was going to do with his suffering. Satan was watching him. The host of heavens were watching Job. What is he going to do? And Job feels watched. Somebody is watching. Verse 12. Am I a sea or a sea serpent that you set a guard over me? Notice that. He feels somebody is over him. Verse 14. Then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. Verse 16. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. Notice that. He feels, he just wants to be left alone. Somebody is watching him. Somebody is there. Verse 18. That you should visit him every morning and test him every moment. Verse 19, how long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? That idea of swallowing my saliva was an idea of just, let me catch my breath. It was a way of just expressing, give me a moment. Give me a little break. I'm talking, I'm tired. Just give me a little break, and I'll continue my discussion. And so maybe Job feels that he's being watched by God and he feels uncomfortable. And then Job asks for forgiveness. He says, if I have sinned, then forgive me. Verse 20, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. Why should I be a burden to myself, he says. Time is flying by swiftly, so let's settle things as soon as possible. If there's a problem between you and me, if there's sin between God and me, then let's settle it quickly, because life is passing by swiftly. See, Job is venting his feeling. This is a guy that has immense pain. Back in those days, they didn't have painkillers like we have today. And so Job had to face the brunt of the pain. And in his agony and pain, he's passing, he's thinking. We can read what's going through a man that is struggling and suffering. He goes from one discussion to another, and is it this, is it that, and this is how I feel, and man, this is, and so you kind of get to see what goes on in the heart of a person that is suffering. He's seeking to understand how he's feeling. And so he's really, in the midst of that, as he's venting his feeling, he's appealing to his friends for understanding and encouragement. And how will his friends respond? Well, chapter 8, Bildad now begins to speak, and he will present 3 logical arguments to prove that Job is guilty. The reason Job is suffering is because he indeed is guilty. Verse 1, then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, how long will you speak these things, and the words of your mouth be like strong wind? In other words, what he says is, Job, your words are a bunch of hot air. That's all you're saying. Just a bunch of wind. Verse 3, does God subvert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? If your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. In other words, your children have perished away because they sinned. That's what Bildad is saying. He has cast them away for their transgression. It's not very comforting. Your children are dead, Job, because they sinned. Verse 5, if you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper you rightful dwelling place. Though your beginning was small, your latter end would increase abundantly. His reasoning is, Job, if you were righteous, then God would make you rich. It kind of sounds like the health and wealth teachers of nowadays. If you are righteous, man, if you pull off things right, then you would do well financially. That was his argument. Well, there's some truth to that, but it certainly didn't apply to Job here. That's not why he's sick. Surely God blesses generally people who are righteous. God blesses them in many different ways. He blesses them with peace. He blesses them with a relationship. He blesses them, in many ways. That God blesses those who are righteous and those who do right. Obviously, those who are not righteous and who do not do the right, they don't have the peace of God. They don't have, the blessings of God in that way. And that is true. In that sense, Bildad is speaking the truth. But it certainly did not apply to Job in the context that he placed it. And so, basically what he's saying, Job, the reason we can prove that you're a sinner is because, God blesses the righteous. If you were righteous the way you said, then you would not be suffering. And then Bildad's second argument, to prove his point, is that he looks back to the past. He looks to the past to prove that Job is suffering because of sin. Verse 8, for inquire, please, of the former age, and consider to things discovered by their fathers. For we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you in other words from their heart? So Bildad said, okay, guys, he says, Job, what we need to do here is we need to look to the past for wisdom, for guidance, and see what we find, where the truth is. Well, we can learn from the past. But as someone has said, the past must be a rudder to guide us, not an anchor to hold us back. What we see here is that for Bildad, he was anchored to the past. Our days are just like yesterday. We're just, we're greenhorns. We really don't know anything. We must look to our ancestors for wisdom. And then we must live by our ancestors' wisdom. Basically what he's saying, our discussion here doesn't really have much relevance because our life is too short. We really haven't learned. We really don't have it together. We must look to our ancestors and look to them for wisdom. And then Bildad appeals to nature to prove his point. Verse 11, can the papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can the reeds flourish without water? While it is yet green and cut down, it withers before any other plant. So are the paths of all who forget God, and the hope of the hypocrite shall perish. What he's saying is the law of cause and effect. See, he says if a papyrus, which is a plant, if it withers, there's a reason why it withers. It withers because it doesn't have water. See, cause and effect. It doesn't have water, so it withers. Job, you are withering. And there's clearly a reason. There's a problem why you're withering. You have done something wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't be withering. Well, chapter 9, it's not very comforting. These friends of Job, they get angrier and angrier as they go on. They get, let's put it this way, they become more and more aggressive as their time goes on, as they go through their 3 cycles of speeches. Towards the end, they actually get angry, and they all forget about comforting Job. They're there just to prove their point. Well, Job responds, chapter 9, and chapter 9 and 10, Job will ask 3 questions. Number 1, how can I be righteous before God? Number 2, how can I meet God in court? And number 3, why was I born? See, Job at this point feels like, I would like to vindicate myself. I would like to prove that I indeed did not sin and that I'm righteous. In his mind, the way Job is thinking is, the only way I can vindicate myself is if I would go to court. And then somebody would question me, and I'd be able to answer questions. I'd be able to defend myself. That's kind of his line of thinking. He's thinking about a legal proceeding to prove his innocence. And so in chapter 9, he questions, how can I be righteous before God? Verse 1 of chapter 9. Then Job answered and said, truly, I know it is so, but how can a man be righteous before God? If one wished to contend with him, he could answer him 1 time out of 1,000. God is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and prospered. He removes the mountains, and they do not know, when he overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth out of its place, and all his pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars. He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the wave of the sea. He made the bear, the Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. See, Job says the problem is that taking God to court would present a problem. If God would appear in court, I couldn't answer his questions. I mean, I could answer maybe 1 question out of 1,000. Because God is so much greater. He made the earth. He made the heavens. He made all the, the galaxies and the stars. He's so much greater. So it'd be kind of in vain to bring God to court because I couldn't answer his questions. And then in verse 14 to verse 35, he kind of goes from answering God to how would it be possible to bring God to court. In other words, if God accepted the summons, Job sends him a summons, okay, God, you need to come to court, and God accepted it, and he would come to court, what would Job say to him? And then Job kind of imagines several situations in his head. What could transpire during that period of time when he would be with God in court? Number one, if God would come, what would I say? Verse 14, how then can I answer him and choose my words to reason with him? For though I were righteous, I could not answer him. And then the other thing that Job is thinking about is, if I declare my innocence, what then? In other words, is there any assurance that if God would come to court, that God would really set him free? Look at verse 20. Though I were righteous, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, it would prove me perverse. I am blameless, yet I do not know myself. I despise my life. It is all one thing. Therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. What Job says is, I feel that ungodly judges, they condemn the wicked, and God does nothing about it. God just kind of stands there. Job feels like he's suffering tremendously, and God does nothing. He just stands there and he doesn't care. And then Job figures, maybe I could just change my attitude. Maybe if I would just put on a positive mental attitude and just look at life in a positive way, maybe that would solve my problem. Verse 25. Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away, they see no good. They pass by like swift ships, like an eagle swooping on its prey. Now listen to this. If I say, I will forget my complaint, I will put off my sad face and wear a smile, I am afraid of all my sufferings. I know that you will not hold me innocent. If I am condemned, why then do I labor in vain? If I wash myself with snow water and cleanse my hands with soap, yet you will plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes will abhor me. If I would just, let's say, just take a shower, take a nice cold shower, put on clean clothes, and paste a smile on my face, maybe that would change things. But no. Would that really change? Would anything really change? He would still be sick, even if he had a positive mental attitude. Even though if he had clean clothes on, he would still be sick, and his three friends would still accuse him of being a sinner. So he feels that it wouldn't be enough. He would still be accused of being a sinner. And then Job figures, okay, so that doesn't work. So that really doesn't change anything. And then he figures, man, if there was a mediator between us and God, if there was someone that could declare me innocent. Verse 32, he says, for he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together, nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hands on us both. See? He still feels he needs to be vindicated before God. And who can do that? You know who comes into the picture? It's Jesus Christ. He is our mediator. He came to walk with men. See, Job's three friends are with God, with Job on the ash heap, and they don't identify. They're there, but they're not emotionally connected with Job. They can't feel what he's feeling. But there's one that did come, and he is sitting with you. in your suffering, and that is Jesus Christ. And he can identify. The Bible says in Hebrews 4:15, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin." So now you have a friend that when you are suffering, that sits with you and that can identify with you and can present you blameless and mediate between you and God and present you blameless before God. Job didn't have that. He didn't have Jesus at that point. He hadn't come to earth. Let's read chapter 10 and we'll close with that. In chapter 10, here Job directs his complaints directly to God and not to his three friends. And Job asks the question, why was he born? He feels that God wove him together in his mother's womb only to destroy him. Verse 1 of chapter 10 says, "My soul loathes my life. I will give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul." In other words, I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to just say it how I feel. Verse 8, "Your hands have made me and fashioned me, an intricate unity, yet you would destroy me." Verse 18, "Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Oh, that I had perished and no eye had seen me." Verse 19, "I would have been as though I had not been. I would have been carried from the womb to the grave." For Job, life doesn't make sense. God, why would you allow me to be born, go through all the pain of weaving me together in my mother's womb, and then make me so intricate, so wonderfully and so fearfully, only to allow me to be born and then to die? It would have been better, Job's reasoning is, that I just wouldn't have been born. Now, that reasoning, maybe you and I have done the same reasoning from time to time. When a baby is born only to die, we might ask, why did that baby die? Or maybe there's a young man or a young woman in the prime of his life is snuffed out, and we say, why would that person die? Why in the prime of his life would he die? It doesn't make sense to the human reasoning, and Job struggles with these answers. And we know that ultimately the answer is Jesus Christ, but we must be careful not to give a too simplistic answer when it comes to suffering. It's something that can be answered, but it's a difficult question for us as humans. How can a righteous God allow suffering? How can a righteous and holy God that loves us allow us to go through suffering? That question will be answered later on as we go through the book of Job. Father, we thank you for just the story of Job, as we see here how a man that is suffering, how he goes from one subject to another, how he reasons with his mind. He tries to come to a conclusion. Why all this suffering? And what are you trying to teach him through this? And I pray, Lord, that you would help us as we go through this book to be better comforters to those who do suffer. That we would be able to identify or encourage. If we can identify, then at least encourage or be there. Pray for them and bring comfort in whatever capacity that we can. In Jesus' name, amen.